I appreciate it. Thank you.
And again, think about your questions in this part. Vivek, I want to ask you a really important question. You made a pretty stark opening statement. You've been in this race for 9 months. You've traveled the country. Has there been an interaction you've had with a voter or voters that has made you think differently, right? Because you're coming in this race with a lot of conviction. But has there been an interaction you've had with a voter in Iowa, Ohio, wherever you've been, right, that has made you think differently about an issue than you did previously?
Sure. I mean, it happens regularly all the time. And let me think of a good example on this. I think I had one last night. I mean, it just happens so regularly, but I'll just pick an example last night from New Hampshire, where somebody who actually came to this country as an immigrant from Ukraine challenged me on my position on Ukraine. My view is that we need to find a reasonable path to peace in Ukraine in a way that secures peace and advances American interests. But this person says, well, how can Russia be allowed to win this war? And one of the things I realized is that based on the things I was hearing from this individual, she's American through and through, but she felt like I probably hadn't communicated as effectively on my position. So the thing she had heard from me, which I've said in the past, in 30-second forms on a debate stage with a little buzzer at the end, you got to make your point concisely. I said, look, if we're going to use our military to protect somebody else's border halfway around the world, we should use our own military to protect our own border in this country right here at home in the United States of America. Well, I think one of the things, and I stand by that, but there's more to the story, right? And so one of the things that I shared with her is, she said, well, why do you automatically assume that Russia and Ukraine are equal? No, I think that just Putin is a craven dictator. But just because Russia is bad doesn't mean Ukraine is good or perfect. And there are complexities to this conflict that leave, even in many cases, Ukraine worse off, let alone the United States. And so we had about a 20-minute exchange in what was the photo line. There was a long line of people waiting to take the picture. But this was important to me to have that one-on-one conversation with her. And what I realized was that, you know what? She understood at least the basis for my position in a way she didn't get from watching me on a TV screen. And so the number one lesson for me that I took away, not just from that interaction, but countless like it. I have one every day. Went to UT Austin's campus 2 days ago. 1,200 college kids on a college campus. You're going to get some challenging questions as a Republican presidential candidate. That's a good thing, but every one of them were respectful. They challenged me on some of my views on climate change. They say, you think climate change is a hoax? I said, not quite. I said, climate change agenda is a hoax because we're shifting more carbon emissions to China than to the United States. That doesn't affect anything relating to do with the climate. It allows China to close the gap on the United States. We're opening up conversations that we otherwise don't have. And so my number one learning in this campaign is that we're not really as divided as we're taught to believe as a country. I truly believe that. I think most of us in this room, I don't know you all, you barely know me. We're getting to know each other today. I could venture to say right now at the start of this, most of us believe in the basic ideals like meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence, free speech and open debate, self-governance over aristocracy, the idea that we the people create a government accountable to us rather than the other way around. Those are the basic American founding ideals. Most of us believe that. And maybe there's a selection bias because you're here on a Saturday morning. Well, I think most of us probably also believe that our neighbors and our classmates and our colleagues and the parents of our kids' classmates also share these ideals in common. But we're not quite sure about it anymore because we don't feel free to talk about it. So that's my number one learning in this campaign. Fear has been infectious across this country. People are afraid to say in public what they will say in private. But you know what I've seen? From college campuses to events like the one we were at last night, courage can be contagious too. It just requires more of us willing to speak our minds in the open. And I am optimistic that if we do it, our best days as a country, we don't have to be in decline. Our best days can still be ahead of us. But that's not just up to me. It's up to all of us. That's where I land on that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Please. They have microphones for you, apparently. Thank you. Thank you, young man.
Hi, I'm Nancy Stiles from Hampton. And I understand that one of your positions is to do away with the Department of Education. I am a strong believer in local control. However, I question if you did away with all of their policies as well, what assurance would I have taking a fourth grade student out of New Hampshire and moving them to Chicago, Texas, wherever else, that they would be put in the fourth grade there rather than pushed down to the third or moved up to the fifth, where they'd be socially inadequate? Can you help me with that?
And remind me your name again?
Nancy Stiles.
Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. It's a great question. And Nancy, you hit on a fundamental theme for me in this campaign. And I think it's important that you all know what you're getting with me. I don't want to pretend to be something that I'm not. And the good point about an election is you get to make a choice. There are certain people, good people, in this race that will favor incremental reform of the federal government and the bureaucracy. I'm not in that camp. I favor quantum leap change. I don't believe it is possible to incrementally reform agencies that have existed for a long time. Last good Republican president, President Trump, excellent president, put Betsy DeVos on top of the Department of Education. I know both of them. I know Betsy DeVos. She's a good person. They said reform it. Doesn't work because now the Department of Education still exists, spending more money than it ever has of our taxpayer dollars on a matter that the federal government should have nothing to do with. That's local education. So my approach is to actually take a lot of these agencies and shut them down where they should no longer exist. Take that $80 billion, send it back to parents across this country so that, and this is the part that addresses your question, every parent, whether they're here or if they move to Chicago or anywhere else, has true educational mobility for their children. So let's say you're that parent, then you show up and say, oh, they want to put you back in third grade. Well, I'm not going to your school just because I chose to buy my house here, because I am economically empowered with the $80 billion that the federal bureaucracy was previously spending through the Department of Education. We shut that down, put that money in the hands of parents across this country to send their kids to wherever they want to go to school. You're going to find a different school within the 30-mile radius of Chicago that will say that he's going to be in fourth grade right where he left off when he left Hampton, New Hampshire. So competition is the true answer here. We don't have it. We have a broken system. It's the civil rights issue of our time, I believe, that kids are trapped in the ghetto of the zip code they're born in. That's wrong. I'm also a fan of this thing we call math. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some math here. The schools that spend the most money per student today are also the schools that deliver the poorest result per student. So I'm a business guy. I don't come from the world of politics. That to me is an opportunity. What's the opportunity here? I'll give you specific numbers in New York City. They spend $40,000 per student per year in the bad schools, but good ones will spend $20,000, $15,000 per student per year. So if a parent is moving their kid from the bad school to the good one, they're moving to a school that spends less money per student. I think the parent should be able to, in that case, take half of that difference with them. So let's do the math on that. $40,000 in the bad school, $20,000 in the good school. That difference is $20,000. Half that difference is $10,000. Put it in the account of that kid. Not only is that kid getting a better education, if that's just invested according to normal returns, and every year that kid gets that extra increment in their bank account, that kid's graduating with a $250,000 graduation gift when he graduates from college. It's not even close which is a better use of money. But the first step to getting there is taking that $80 billion, wasted at the federal level, a federal Department of Education that's telling local schools you don't get that money unless you adopt toxic racial and gender ideologies. That's where it's coming from. The federal government says you don't get their money unless you do that. No, we have to shut that beast down. You have to slay the Leviathan. And that is not an incremental approach. You're right about that. If you want incrementalism, I think there's plenty of other candidates that will offer that. But my view is we have a fourth branch of government that is unconstitutional. The correct answer is shut it down and give the power and the money back to the people. Thank you, Nancy.
The parent to spend all of that money on education.
The parent would have to spend all the money on the education. That's right. That is specifically for the realm of education. That's exactly the answer. So it funds the otherwise underfunded gap that you have in school choice programs across this country. That's exactly how it would work, specifically for education. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll go to the back there, and then we'll come back up front here.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. You've expressed some illogical and dangerous positions, just about everything under the sun. But I will only bring up a few points today.
Okay. Just be respectful of everyone, but we'll pick your favorite ones. Thank you.
Just a few years ago, we all saw firsthand the disastrous results when a ruthless capitalist, a scam artist, a showman, and a liar with no public service experience became the President of the United States. And yet we are here again. My fellow New Hampshire residents are being manipulated by showmen and Trump wannabes to win our votes. Mr. Ramaswamy, you may be a millionaire, and you may know how to avoid paying taxes by incorporating companies in Bermuda, but let's talk about your lack of job qualifications. You're not qualified to become the principal of my children's school of only 1,000 students. You're not qualified to be the select board of my town with a population of 16,000 people. And you're definitely not qualified to run for the highest office of our nation to govern 330 million Americans. Spewing nonsensical, fast-talking, empty words, interspersed with name-dropping Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, should not be misconstrued as knowledgeable. We Americans should stop thinking that rich men who fund their campaigns and manipulate us into thinking that they're smart or savvy are qualified for the presidency, to receive the codes to launch nuclear weapons, and to become the commander-in-chief of our military forces. Yes, it's coming. Mr. Ramaswamy, if we American voters... Thank you. It's coming.
We'll let her finish. We'll give her a chance to finish.
Thank you.
Mr. Ramaswamy, ends with a question mark, though.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You will. Yeah. If we American voters keep supporting self-promoting showmen who treat the U.S. presidency or vice presidency as an entry-level position, then we, the American people, are to blame for the destruction of our democratic institutions. Please, your thoughts, Don.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Before you answer.
I want to answer that, yeah.
I know you want to answer, and I want you to answer. But everyone, remember, everyone's in here at the same time. You can make your point, but get to the question first. Yeah. Try to? Okay.
And hard questions are welcome. Just end them with the question mark is all I say. So here's what I will say. What do I hear embedded in that question? There's a fundamental skepticism of somebody who comes from outside and take as an entry-level job. That was what was in your question, which I think is a valid criticism. An entry-level job to be the U.S. president. Let me just share with you one of my learnings in this campaign. We have an imperfect system right now, and you all face imperfect choices in that system. We were talking about this backstage. What was the number one learning for me? This is a super PAC puppet game. It's my number one learning coming in from the outside. You're told that candidates actually run campaigns that you fund by giving $35 contributions? Nonsense. The system is funded by not multimillionaires, multi-billionaires who use politicians in both parties, Democrat and Republican Party, as their puppets. The super PACs are a cancer on our system. So if you want to break that system, and I'll tell you, it's a law of nature. It's like a law of physics. As the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, every politician dances to the tune of their biggest donor. It's just a fact. Now, in my case, it is true that biggest donor is me. Now, do I want a system in which only people who have had the level of success that I've had in the world of business and the American dream are the ones who are able to run for president? No. But is that better than a system where it's somebody else's billionaire puppet that's on that debate stage that actually is just uttering words handed to them by a billionaire-provided super PAC? Yes, I think that's better. And I think if we're going to address the corruption in Washington, D.C., the corruption of people, and there are other candidates in this race that fit this description, making millions of dollars off of connections in government service, afterwards, lobbying in a career using government connections. This is corruption that exists in both parties. Then yes, I do think it will take an outsider to that system coming in to break that system. One of the things that I think we need to stop apologizing for in this country is the power of capitalism. I have succeeded not in government, and I will not feign having government experience that I don't have. But the people who do have government experience, in some ways, got us into the mess that we're in today. So I think we live in a moment where it will take an outsider. Someone who comes from the outside, ideally even someone who comes from the next generation, to reach the next generation of whom we have so many in this room today. I think it will take somebody whose best days, I hope, are still yet ahead in life to see a country whose best days are still yet ahead in life. And I'm not name-dropping when I mention Thomas Jefferson. These are people I look up to as our founding fathers. He was 33 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I'm an old man by comparison. He invented the swivel chair while he was at it. That's the founding spirit we need to revive in this country. And in this particular moment, yes, I do think it will take an outsider to do it. Yes, I do think it will take an outsider to address our national debt. $33 trillion. We need a CEO in the White House. How does a CEO run a business? How have I run the businesses I've run? Zero-based budgeting. Don't start with last year's budget as the baseline, because last year's budget was broken by the same existing political class. And last year's budget was based on the previous year's budget, which was equally broken by the same corrupt special interest system. So I say break that system. Start with zero as the baseline, and then ask what's actually necessary. You're not going to get that type of leadership from somebody who comes from, I think, within that broken system. So you're right, you do face a choice. As I shared with Nancy earlier, if you want somebody who's going to incrementally reform the bureaucracy and the administrative state, I'm not your candidate. If you want somebody who has government experience as their qualification to be your next president, then I'm not your candidate. But if you want somebody who comes from the outside, a patriot who speaks the truth, uncaptured by the super PACs, willing to get in there and actually gut that shadow government, the corrupt swamp in Washington, D.C., but actually see the job through, as a leader from a different generation to reach the next generation, then yes, I am your candidate, and that is why I'm in this race. And the beauty of this is, A, you have the right to speak your mind, as does everybody else in this room. That's what makes America beautiful. That's what makes America great. And the part that really makes our system what it is that that choice belongs to you, not to me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity you guys have given us. So, next question. Thank you. Oh, we'll go right here. This gentleman right here. Yeah, please. Thank you. And then we'll go right behind you, and then we'll bring it back up here.
Okay, my question will be regarding the Palestinian situation. Now, before I ask my question, I want to set the record first for myself. I hate war situations. And secondly, I do not like politicians. If you win this...
I agree with you on the first, both counts.
If you win this election, you're going to be a politician, and probably I won't like you either.
That's fair.
All right. Now, Palestinian situation, everybody is calling it a Hamas situation, which is totally wrong. It's not Hamas, it's Palestinian situation, because Hamas is the organization which was started or created by Israel with the help of US. We had one Hitler in the history. He created the Holocaust. We have another wannabe Hitler in Israel who want to create another Holocaust in Middle East with the Palestinian people. Now, my question to you, where do you stand here right now on the Palestinian situation and how this can be resolved, and what is your take on it?
I hear your view, sir.
And also one last thing is, there's one Hitler wannabe in Middle East, and other is right behind him. Guess who?
So let me just respond to that question. I know that there are diverse views on this question. I respectfully disagree with yours on this. I think it is wrong when we in the United States or in the UN or anybody else create a false equivalence between Israel defending its own homeland versus the behaviors of the terrorists who target Israel. So I reject the comparison, and I think I'll just speak candidly. You shared your view, I'm going to share mine. I think it is offensive to compare the current prime minister of Israel to Hitler. I think that is way off base, and I deeply disagree with that. That is wrong. Now, let me say something further. I say it without apology. Israel has the absolute right to defend its own homeland. I'm different from the far left that might give these criticisms of Israel. Of course, many of us in this room are. But I also want to be clear-headed about it. I absolutely stand for Israel's right to defend itself. But I also recognize the position I'm running for as President of the United States of America. And my moral obligation as the U.S. President is to American citizens. So there's a couple things I will say about that. Yes, we will stand with Israel in its right to defend its own homeland, give diplomatic air cover. Frankly, this gentleman, we don't have to be upset at him. The UN pretty soon is going to start to effectively say the same things. We have to tell the UN that that's wrong. We have to provide Israel with diplomatic support, munitions support as needed. Further, even provide them with intelligence sharing. Get to the bottom of that intelligence failure, frankly, both in the U.S. and Israel, that allowed this to happen. But we have to do it in a way that avoids broader regional conflict in the Middle East that does not advance American interests. $3 trillion spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. To what end? The Taliban is still in charge in Afghanistan 20 years later. Frankly, a hostile anti-American regime in Iraq that's vulnerable to Iranian incursion. That didn't advance American interests, and we have to own up to that. And there are many in the Republican Party. Some of you may have seen an interview a few nights ago with Hannity. It was a disaster from, in terms of the lack of clarity in the neocon wing of the Republican Party that fails to admit those errors of the past that we have to learn from. So I think we've made our worst decisions in the past when we've responded emotionally to military crises or to crises of other kinds. We have to respond rationally, cool-headedly, and ask what advances the American interest. And then the one point I will make is yesterday I was at Eagle Pass in Texas on the southern border. Last Saturday, exactly a week ago from right now, I was in Pittsburgh on your northern border in New Hampshire, taking a look at the wide-open border with Canada. The number one lesson we have to take away in the U.S. is if that can happen in Israel, that can happen right here at home in the United States of America. And my top job as your commander-in-chief when it comes to our national defense is to defend our own homeland against that border invasion, against cyber attacks, super EMP attacks, missile attacks, space-based attacks that we're vulnerable to in the United States. We have an establishment in both parties in the last 25 years that has left us vulnerable, fighting in other parts of the world but failing to defend our own homeland. And that's my job as your next president, while honoring our relationships with our allies. And I think that's the kind of rational, non-emotional, cool-headed approach we're going to need in the next commander-in-chief, and that's the way I'm going to lead as your next president. We'll go right behind you. Thank you.
My name is Jim Rickers. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. My question is, immediately after the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, the United States froze all Russian assets they could find in the banking system. Now a Republican member of Congress has proposed going a step further and actually confiscating the assets and putting them to whatever use we want. For example, the U.S. could take the Russian money and pay ourselves back for what we gave to Ukraine. My question is, how do you feel about crossing that? What's your view on crossing that line between freezing and confiscation?
It's a great question. What's your name?
Jim Rickers.
Jim, thank you for asking. I mean, that's why I love New Hampshire. I mean, these are questions in the interstices, but they matter. So I think there's a stronger case for using the financial system to exact reparations in the case of China, which unleashed hell on the world with a man-made virus that was leaked that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans and people around the world and cost this economy billions upon billions by way of understatement. So that's, if we're going to talk about a case of using financial levers to hold another country accountable, that's the one that's high on my list. But I think that the right way we deal with Russia, in my view, is very different from the rest of the field in both parties on this. Is that, do I trust Vladimir Putin? No, I do not. But did Nixon trust Mao in 1972? No, he did not. But we did what we needed to do. We pulled Mao Zedong, in the old communist China, out of the USSR because the USSR was our top threat. Well, today, communist China is our top threat. And I worry our policies are driving Russia further into China's arms when the Russia-China alliance today represents the single greatest threat that we face as Americans. So what does that mean we need to do? I actually think we live in a moment where we could reopen some of those relations with Russia. I think it was wrong, bad idea for us to bomb or be responsible for allowing the bombing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's basically all but certain that the United States was aware of it, if not directly involved in it. That was a mistake. pull Russia out of China's hands. Do I trust Putin? No, but I trust him to follow his self-interest, just as he can trust us to follow ours. And that actually weakens China. China's top bet right now is that if they invade Taiwan, the U.S. won't want to go to war with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time. But if Russia's no longer in China's camp, then Xi Jinping is going to have to think twice. So yes, I think we live in a moment where it's going to take somebody who thinks outside of the traditional box to take us off the path to World War III that I worry that we are slowly on already. We are too complacent right now. I think we face a risk of major conflict, an era of the Russia-China alliance, other hostile powers to the United States, of major conflict. And my foreign policy is really simple. Avoid World War III, declare economic independence from China, and protect this homeland right here in the United States of America. Those are my top three priorities. Everything else pales in comparison. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll come to this side and we'll go back and forth between these sides. Come to this gentleman right here.
Vivek, nice to meet you.
It's good to see you.
Thanks.
What's your name?
Neil from Hampton Falls. Quick question. It's current about the Speaker of the House. And a couple weeks ago, Matt Gaetz and coalition effectively ousted Kevin McCarthy. My question is, what are your views on the reasons why he was voted out?
So I have a benefit here of not coming from that world of D.C. partisan horse trading and personality-driven vengeances back and forth. Let's just take a step back. Sometimes in the Republican Party, we obsess a little bit too much over the question of who. Kevin McCarthy or somebody else. Steve Scalise or somebody else. Ronna McDaniel or somebody else. And for those of you who don't know who that is, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. I mean, Donald Trump or somebody else, right? Forget the question of the who for a second. Let's talk about the what and the why. What do we stand for? And why do we stand for it? Right? What I see, what we should be talking about right now, the $33 trillion national debt that our next generation is going to bear on their shoulders unless we do something about it. There were negotiations led by McCarthy and others to raise the debt ceiling. Well, to what end? We still have a $33 trillion national debt. Nobody's talked about how we deal with that. The border crisis of historic proportions. I was at Eagle Pass yesterday watching people literally just pour over into this country. I've never seen in my life a more organized, let alone government-organized process for violating the law at such a large scale. A dependence on China, our enemy, for our modern way of life that continues to grow by the day. An economy that's flailing we haven't seen since the Carter era. So yes, I want to talk about the what and the why. Tell me about what our plan is to address the crises that we face. And then the question of the who becomes much more obvious. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? That's what I want us talking about. And part of the reason you see this conflict pop up in the Republican Party ever so often, which will show up in the form of some personality conflict, and the media and everything being what it is loves to fixate on those, is there symptoms of a deeper loss of direction and purpose in the Republican Party itself. Right now, I worry the Republican Party has become a hollowed-out husk of a party in search of an agenda. So I'm not engaged in the personality-driven bickering. I could care less for it. I don't think it advances our goals. I want to focus on the what and the why, and then we can pick which person we put in the responsibility of the nanny to shepherd, a couple hundred people in Congress. That's the less important question than the substance of it itself. And so the good news in all of that is sometimes in chaos there can actually be opportunity. And so I hope if we use this as an opportunity, and I'm trying to do my part to help lead this way, if we use this chaos to actually say, we don't have a speaker, who's it going to be? Well, maybe we'll just talk about what we stand for and why we stand for it and use that as our litmus test to pick the right speaker. Then we will be stronger on the other side for it. So that's the kind of way I approach this and lead with this issue. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Thank you. We'll come to this gentleman in the front here.
Hi, I'm Sriram from New Jersey. I do see the president of a country as a CEO of the country. With that said, someone having a high level of empathy. So with the financial distress that is lurking, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are to balance that with all the government programs that needs to go on to really respect the empathy that's required?
Great question. Thank you. So the good news is I think we live in a moment where those aren't trade-offs. They go together. Some of the financial distress comes from spending government money we don't have. Well, one of my policies as U.S. president is we will stop using our taxpayer money to pay people to do the exact opposite of what is best for them. Right now, we pay single mothers in inner cities. I've been to the south side of Chicago and elsewhere. Single mothers who get more money not to have a man in the house they're married to than to have a man in the house who they're married to. When, in fact, the nuclear family is inherently good. 25% fatherlessness rate in this country. Yes, we ought to have empathy for kids who grow up in those households who are 8 times more likely to end up in prison, 10 times more likely to end up in poverty, over 10 times less likely to graduate from high school or enter and get a college degree. But we're using our government money to do it. We're using our government money to pay people more not to go to work than to go to work. Not only is that leaving people economically worse off, that's driving a mental health epidemic of depression and anxiety in Gen Z and young Americans who are responding to bad government incentives. So I could go straight down the list. I've been to Kensington in the inner city of Philadelphia. You know what happens there? The aid programs, including funded by the government, hand out crack pipes and needles as a form of aid. We need to stop. Even last night at the border, actually, just to bring this up, happened yesterday. I watched a father and a daughter crossing that Rio Grande. The U.S. Coast Guard brought them over. I saw the whole thing. The daughter was there. She's 12 years old. The father was in shock from cold, like literally physical shock. He had to be hospitalized. She ended up under a bridge. We saw over the course of the couple hours there the whole story play out. We asked her in Spanish, "Why are you here?" She said, "In search for opportunity, in search for a better life." 12-year-old girl from Honduras. That is not compassion. That is cruelty. And so I think we live in a moment where this isn't a trade-off between bringing the CEO mindset to the White House, which I do. Zero-based budgeting on down. Address our national debt crisis. Grow our economy. Do it without apology. But we live in a moment where that government money from the Department of Education, which we talked about earlier, on down, isn't even serving the very people it was supposed to help. So yes, I think it takes a CEO, but I think it takes a CEO who understands with conviction that it's not a trade-off versus who's going to suffer as a consequence of the decisions. What decisions can we first make that are going to help everybody lift them up from economic struggle, from poverty in many cases as well? And I do think that that question, the part about young people who are often baited by government aid to even opt out of the workforce. We're seeing that spread across the country. What's the real crisis in the United States of America today? It's even deeper than our economy. I can tell you this, speaking as a member of my generation. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity at a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole in our hearts. And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. It almost doesn't matter what the poison is, actually. Even we in our party sometimes obsess over it too much. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning. For a long time, we in our party, we have been running from something. Now is our moment to actually start running to something, to our vision of what it means to be an American. And I think our government has played a role in creating that vacuum by paying people in the name of helping them to actually leave them, the very recipients of that so-called aid or help, worse off than they otherwise would have been. not only economically, but even in a deeper sense. And one of my jobs as U.S. president, half the job of a U.S. president is policy, no doubt about it. And I'm glad we're talking a lot about policy today. For a U.S. senator or congressman, that's almost 100% of the job. But for the U.S. president, it's my belief that at least half the job is reviving a national character that we lack today. That's what Reagan said in '89 when he left office. Of all the things he could have picked, bringing us to the near end of the Cold War, getting us out of stagflation in the Carter era, growing the economy. He didn't say any of that. When he left office in his farewell speech, the thing he talked about was being proud of reviving a national character that we lacked when he first took office in '81. I think a lot about not what I want to tell you in my inauguration speech in January 2025. That's not the destination. That is the start line. The destination for me in this journey is January 2033. What do I want to tell you that we actually did? That's the way, when a CEO in the White House, we think about the destination. I want to tell you we shut down much of the administrative state, 75% headcount reduction in the number of federal employees. We drill, we frack, we burn coal, we embrace nuclear energy, we roll back those regulations. We put people back to work by no longer paying them more to stay at home than to go to work. That we declared economic independence from China. We did it while keeping us out of World War III. Most importantly of all, though, I want to tell you that we revived national pride in our two sons and their generation. They won't even be in high school when we leave the White House in January 2033 after 2 terms. But that's what I want to tell you. And yes, I think you're right. That will take not just the technical CEO. It's important, but it's not the entire job. That's half the job through the policy. The other half is answering what it means to be an American today. If you ask most people my age that question, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That is the vacuum. That's the void. And I think the most important job of the next president is to decisively answer that question, deliver a vision of our national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes the poison to irrelevance. That's actually how we're going to win, and that's the standard I want you all to hold me to if you all put us in that office. Thank you very much, Ron.
We're going to have time. Oh, real quick. Democracy speeds things up. We're going to have time for one more question.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, we're running out of time.
It's up to you.
Oh, my goodness.
I know you were looking around here.
This gentleman in the back is a young man. He's had his hand up for a while, so give a young person the
Mr. Ramaswamy, I'm a junior at the Phillips Exeter Academy nearby. We recently just saw Judge Dougherty agree with the Attorney Generals of Missouri and Louisiana that the Biden administration colluded with Twitter and other big tech to silence reports of Hunter's laptop like the New York Post and continued throughout his administration to silence conservatives on social media. How, as president, would you confront big tech and ensure that the First Amendment is protected on all platforms?
First of all, I want to say I'm proud of a 16-year-old. How old are you, 16? 17? Really in the weeds here. And then that one hits close to home for me because that particular case and the ruling was argued in part drawing on a legal theory that this is just a coincidence. I happen to have played a small role in authoring 3 years ago on the pages of the Wall Street Journal with a former law professor of mine. And we made an argument at the time that was dismissed widely. People laughed at it as a conspiracy theory. Now it's in the mainstream of our appellate court system, which I'm proud of, which said this, right? The traditional wisdom is that the First Amendment, y'all know the First Amendment, enshrines freedom of religion, free expression, that's freedom of speech and otherwise, freedom of assembly and so on. That the First Amendment only applies to the government, but that companies are free to silence speech as they see fit. Well, hold on there a second. That's true if the companies are actually behaving as companies. But it turns out, and this was evident in January of 2021 when I co-wrote that piece that these cases are now drawing on, turns out if the government is threatening companies to do something through the back door that the government couldn't do through the front door, then the Supreme Court has long held that those companies are still bound by the First Amendment. There's a case, actually, the Bantam Books case, dates about 40, 50 years ago. There's a bookstore owner who wanted to sell a book. The prosecutor and the local government didn't like the book. They said, take it down. He refused to. They then threatened him and said, we're going to bring some case against you on an unrelated matter. Well, then the bookstore owner, I don't want to deal with that. He takes the book down. A customer wants to buy the book. He sues. They said, oh, it's just a private company. The Supreme Court said, not so fast. That was the government threatening the private company, in that case, the bookstore owner. Today, it's Facebook or Google, to do something through the back door the government couldn't do directly. Because this is New Hampshire, I'm going into a layer of depth I wouldn't usually go into here. Same thing with incentives. If the government gives you a carrot to do something the government couldn't do directly, that's state action in disguise. So there's a case involving the railroads. During the war on drugs, the government wanted to fight drugs, and they said, we want to search and seize drugs on passengers. Well, the government can't do that directly because we have this pesky little thing in the United States called the Fourth Amendment. I think it's a good thing. What the government is, they passed a law that said that the railroad employees or operators would not be liable for being sued by passengers or by employees if the railroad chose to search them. It's not the government doing it, it's just a private company doing it. The Supreme Court said not so fast. If it's state action in disguise, that you gave those companies an incentive purposely to do something the government couldn't do, the Constitution still applies. Well, what do we have now? Section 230, which tells tech companies, it's a special law that gives tech companies special liability immunity from being sued for taking down constitutionally protected content. So one of the things I've learned in my short time in this political world is sometimes you got to make things a rhyme to make them stick. So what we say is, if it is state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies. If the government is threatening these companies and giving them carrots and sticks to do its dirty work through the back door, then these companies are and ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this is, I think, if we're closing on this question, maybe I'll wrap it this way, which is to say that we live in a complicated time. The threats to liberty aren't what they were back in 1980. I believe the building we're in, I was told before I walked in here, was one where Abraham Lincoln famously spoke about 160 years ago. Lincoln said it at the height of the Civil War, the dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. I say the dogmas of 1980, even in our conservative movement, are inadequate to address the unique challenges that we face in the year 2023. Reagan he faced just big government, but didn't face the collusion of big government and big business to together do what neither could do alone. And the real irony in all of this is the reason Silicon Valley is doing it is that the old version of break up big tech used to come from the left. So what they basically said is, hey, we'll censor hate speech and misinformation as you define it, but we won't do it for free. We want the left to now look the other way when it comes to leaving our monopoly power intact. Just like Wall Street did it on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. So these are complex threats we face today. And I believe we require a commander-in-chief who deeply understands the unique nature of those threats we face today. It won't work. We're just going to scratch the surface and get nowhere if you have a super PAC paid politician puppet who reads slogans served up to them on a teleprompter to pretend to be a Republican instead of a Democrat, and the same old game moves on. No, the system isn't changing. The broken, corrupt super PAC system, the people that send you the advertisements you see here in New Hampshire, this depends on whether you can cut through that. And I trust you guys here. Our process depends on it. You all go first in the reason to tell the difference between somebody who's serving you up poll-tested slogans and somebody who has a deep first personal understanding of the threats we face and how we're going to overcome them. And what I will say is, how old are you, man? You're 16, right? Look like you're about 16. That's about right. So I'm proud of you for coming out here on a Saturday morning and asking this question. You're young. But what I will say is, our nation is actually a little young. We don't have to be that nation in decline. We don't have to be ancient Rome at the end of the Roman Empire, as we're taught to believe. I think we are really just a little young. going through our own version of adolescence, figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you view it that way, at least for me, it makes sense again. You go through your adolescence, you go through that identity crisis. You lose your way a little bit. You lose your self-confidence. You make some mistakes. I did when I was your age. Most of us probably did. But we are stronger for it when we get to our adulthood on the other side. So, no, I don't think we have to be that nation in decline. I think we are still yet a nation in our ascent. Maybe the early stages of our ascent. Try it this way. Maybe we're not even at base camp. On our way to that shining city on a hill, that country where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is in some of our cases, that you get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what? You are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. I was looking for the early question. She might have left. But every one of us, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we together will revive to save our great country. Thank you for coming out this morning. God bless you. God bless our United States.